Let me ask you something. What's the one thing that holds everything together when everything else falls apart? I've asked myself that question at every major turning point in my life. Not just when I was a teenager dreaming of America, but even when I was at the top, Mr. Olympia, box office star, governor. Because life has a funny way of humbling you. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how many achievements you stack up, life will find a way to test your foundation. And I learned, early, that without discipline, there is no foundation. Discipline is what stayed when motivation left. It was there when the applause faded, when the spotlight moved on, when the world said, "You've done enough," and part of me wanted to believe it. It was discipline that whispered, "You're not finished yet." You know, when I was growing up in Thal, a small village in Austria, nobody thought I would become anything. My parents wanted me to become a police officer, maybe a tradesman. They were practical, they were survivors of war, and they saw dreams as dangerous. But I had this fire inside me. I wanted something more, something bigger. I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to create. The truth is, I wasn't the biggest kid. I wasn't the smartest. But I had something that most people around me didn't, a willingness to suffer for my vision. That's where discipline comes in. It's not glamorous. It's not flashy. It's cold mornings. It's pain you invite into your life on purpose. It's saying yes to hard things when nobody's clapping for you. Most people think discipline is about restriction, about what you can't do. But I see it differently. Discipline is freedom. It gives you control over your time, your thoughts, your direction. Without it, you're tossed around by life. With it, you become the architect of your own future. And here's what I want you to know, especially if you're watching this and you're in your 60s or 70s, it is not too late. Some of the most powerful transformations I've ever witnessed didn't come from people in their 20s. They came from people who had lived a whole life already, raised families, built careers, made mistakes, and still had the courage to say, "I want to grow. I want to change. I want to live with purpose." That kind of courage, that's discipline in its purest form. I've met men and women who picked up the weights for the first time at 65, who started new careers, new routines, new identities. And do you know what they all had in common? They stopped waiting for perfect conditions. They decided that today, not someday, was the time to act. Discipline isn't built in one day. It's built in 1,000 choices. Waking up early when you want to sleep in. Saying no when it would be easier to say yes. Taking the stairs when the elevator is right there. And those choices, they compound. They build momentum. They shape who you become. So before we go deeper into this story, the wins, the losses, the lessons, I want to leave you with this thought. When everything else is stripped away, your job, your title, your youth, your plans, what remains is who you've trained yourself to be. If you train discipline, you're never truly lost. Because even in your worst moments, you know how to take the next step. This story isn't about me. It's about what's possible for you. Let's go there together. Let's begin. They say greatness starts in grand arenas, with cameras flashing and crowds cheering. But mine started in a room that smelled like metal and dust, where my breath turned to fog every morning, and the weights were older than I was. The gym in Thal wasn't really a gym at all. It was more like a storage room, concrete floor, no heating, and equipment built by hand. Some of the bars were bent. The dumbbells were uneven. The windows frosted over in winter, and there was no music, only the sound of clanking steel and heavy breathing. But to me, it was a cathedral. Every morning before school, I would sneak in. It was still dark out. My fingers would sting from the cold iron, but I didn't care. That's where I found myself, between sets, between silence, between the dreams I had and the work I was willing to do. No one told me to be there. No one was watching. And that's where I learned the first real lesson about discipline. It's what you do when nobody sees you that defines who you become. I wasn't training for a medal. I wasn't chasing applause. I was chasing something inside me. I couldn't explain it at the time, but I knew, deep in my gut, that this work, this suffering, this sweat, it was leading somewhere. You have to understand, I wasn't born into opportunity. My family had very little. We lived simply. My father was strict. Emotions weren't something we showed. There was no talk of dreams or becoming famous. Life was about duty, not ambition. But inside me, there was this rebellion, a quiet defiance. I wanted something bigger, not just for money, or fame, or muscles. I wanted control, over my body, over my future, over the narrative of my life. And I started earning that control rep by rep, alone in that freezing gym. I still remember the ache in my arms, the burning in my lungs, the cracks in the concrete floor. Every morning, I built something stronger than muscle. I built belief. People laughed at me back then. They said, "You'll never make it. You'll end up like the rest of us." I don't blame them. They were speaking from their own limitations. But I had already learned something they hadn't. No one can limit you more than you limit yourself. I started cutting out pictures of bodybuilders from magazines. Reg Park, Steve Reeves. Icons. Heroes. To me, they weren't just strong. They were statues carved from discipline. I would stare at their photos for hours, imagining myself on that stage. Not in Austria, but in America. Every weight I lifted was a vote for that dream. Every morning I showed up, I was casting a ballot for who I wanted to become. And let me tell you something, I didn't have perfect routines. I didn't always feel confident. There were days I questioned everything. But I showed up anyway. And that's the essence of discipline. You don't wait to feel ready. You show up because that's who you are. Looking back now, I realize, that cold room with the rusty weights was my first classroom. It taught me that pain is not the enemy. That comfort is a slow poison. That if you can learn to suffer with purpose, there is nothing you cannot build. So when people ask, "How did you become Mr. Olympia?" I tell them, it didn't start in front of the cameras. It started there, in that freezing gym, with no one watching. And if you're listening to this, maybe in your 60s or 70s, wondering if it's too late to begin again, let me tell you, you don't need perfect equipment. You don't need perfect timing. You just need a reason, and the courage to start. The rusty weights of your past can still shape the strongest version of your future. Because discipline doesn't care how shiny the tools are. It only cares that you pick them up. And that's what I did. Day after day. Cold morning after cold morning. Until those weights didn't just shape my body, they shaped my identity. And that identity would soon be tested on the biggest stage I could imagine. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you what it was like to leave everything I knew behind, with nothing but a dream. I left home with just a suitcase, a heart full of fire, and one tool I trusted more than anything else: discipline. When I boarded that plane at 18 to chase a dream in America, I didn't have money. I didn't speak the language well. I had no connections. But what I did have was something no one could take away from me: the work ethic I built lifting rusty weights in the cold mornings of Austria. I still remember stepping off the plane in Los Angeles. Everything felt bigger, louder, faster. I was just a kid with a thick accent and an even thicker belief that I was meant for something more. But the truth, those early days were hard. I was living in a small apartment, sharing space with other bodybuilders, scraping by on a tight budget. My diet was canned tuna and oatmeal. I trained like a machine, worked construction jobs on the side, and studied English late into the night. And I was lonely. There were days I missed home. I missed my family, the familiar streets of Thal, the smell of my mother's cooking. But I never let homesickness outweigh my hunger, because I knew what I wanted: to become the best in the world. People laughed at my dream. They heard my accent and told me I'd never make it in America. They said no one would ever take a guy named Schwarzenegger seriously. But I didn't let their doubt define me. I used it as fuel. Every no I heard became one more reason to train harder, learn faster, push further. Rejection didn't break me. It shaped me. Because when you have discipline, failure is never final. It's just part of the process. I remember losing bodybuilding competitions early on. The judges said my posing wasn't right. My proportions were off. I could have quit. I could have said, maybe they're right. But instead, I went home, studied the winners, and came back better. That's what discipline does. It doesn't panic when you fall. It helps you rise with purpose. And the same thing happened when I chased acting. Hollywood didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. I was too muscular, too foreign, too different. They said, "You'll never be a star." But I had a vision. and I was willing to outwork every obstacle between me and that vision. I took acting lessons, voice lessons, movement classes. I studied the business, met with producers, showed up every day as if success was inevitable. And slowly, opportunities started to open. One movie, then another, then Conan, then Terminator. I wasn't just building a career. I was building a name. Not because things were easy, but because I never stopped showing up. I want you to understand something, especially if you're watching this and feeling like the world has passed you by. You don't need a perfect start. You need persistence. You may be in a season of your life where you feel like you're starting from scratch, maybe after retirement, a loss, or a major life change. And it can be scary. But I'm telling you, your past does not disqualify you. It prepares you. I built everything, from nothing, one choice at a time. You can too. No matter your age, your background, or your setbacks. If you're willing to carry discipline with you, you're never truly starting over. You're just beginning again, stronger, wiser, and more ready than ever. And just when I thought I had reached the top, when I'd won the titles, made the movies, and become a household name, life handed me a new challenge, one I never saw coming. And once again, discipline would be the thing that kept me going. Stop, stop, stop. Before we continue, I want to take a brief pause. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching or listening from? And have you ever experienced something similar in your own life? A moment when you realized something had to change? If this story speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe. There's more to come, and I'd be honored to have you on this journey. Now, let's continue. Even the strongest feel weak sometimes. You don't hear that much in the world I came from. Bodybuilding, Hollywood, politics. Everyone wants to see the wins, the muscles, the medals, the big speeches. But real life is a lot messier than that. There were days I felt completely lost. Days where I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back at me. Not because of my body, but because of what was happening inside. After all the titles, the fame, the victories, there came a point when the applause faded. And when it got quiet, I started asking myself questions I didn't have answers to. Who am I when I'm not competing? When I'm not on camera? When the routine ends? What remains? Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Success doesn't protect you from pain. Discipline doesn't make you invincible. Life still throws curveballs. And sometimes, it hits you right in the heart. When my marriage ended, it shook me to my core. I had spent decades building my career, my image, my legacy. But in my personal life, I had made mistakes. Mistakes I couldn't undo. And no trophy could fix that. No role I played on screen could cover up the reality of what I had broken. I felt shame, guilt, regret. And for a while, I felt lost. But discipline, that old, familiar friend, it didn't abandon me. It was still there, quietly waiting in the background. Not shouting, not judging, just waiting for me to choose it again. And I did. I went back to the basics. Woke up early, trained my body, focused my mind, not to win anything, but to heal, to rebuild, to become someone I could respect again. Because that's what discipline is. It's not about perfection. It's about commitment. It's not about pretending everything's okay. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when it isn't. Especially when it isn't. There were mornings I didn't want to get out of bed. Days where my confidence was gone. But I laced up my shoes. I picked up the weights. I went for the walk. I wrote the apology. I made the phone call. One step at a time. Discipline didn't erase the pain, but it carried me through it. And over time, I realized something important. Your lowest moments don't define you. Your response to them does. I know many of you watching this have felt that same kind of loss. Maybe it was a divorce, the loss of a loved one, retirement that left you wondering who you are without the job. I want you to know, I've been there too. And I'm telling you, you're not finished. You're not broken beyond repair. You're not too old to grow. In fact, these moments, the ones where you feel weakest, they are the very ground where strength is built. You just have to decide to take one step forward. That's what I did. Again and again. No shortcuts. No drama. Just quiet, consistent action. And slowly, I began to rebuild my identity, not around fame or fortune or reputation, but around integrity. Around doing the right thing when no one's watching. Around keeping promises to myself. Around being the kind of man I would have looked up to as that young kid in Austria. That's what discipline gave me. A way back to myself. And as I rebuilt, I began to see something beautiful. I wasn't the only one choosing to start over. All around me were people, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who were beginning again. Reinventing. Reclaiming their power. They weren't chasing youth. They were chasing truth. And that's the next part of this journey I want to share with you. Because I've seen what's possible when people stop believing in expiration dates and start believing in themselves. I've seen people start over at 60, 70, not because they had to, but because they could. That's something we don't hear enough. Our culture puts so much focus on youth, on the idea that your best years are behind you once you hit a certain number. But I'm telling you right now, that idea is a lie. I've lived long enough to see what most people miss, the quiet power of reinvention. It doesn't always come with a big announcement. Sometimes it starts small, a decision to wake up earlier, to eat differently, to finally start writing that book, or walk that mile. Sometimes it's someone walking into a gym for the first time with grey hair and trembling hands, thinking they're too late, but showing up anyway. And I've watched those people transform. I remember meeting a man named Walter in his 70s. He had just retired, and for the first time in his life, he admitted to himself that he had never really pursued what he loved, art. He'd worked hard, provided for his family, done everything right. But now, he wanted to start again. So he bought a sketchpad. 1 page turned into 10, then 100. A year later, he was displaying his work in a local gallery. Not because someone gave him permission, because he decided it wasn't too late. Then there was Maria, 68 years old. She came to one of my fitness events with her daughter. She pulled me aside afterward and said, "Arnold, I've never lifted weights in my life, but I want to start now." I told her, "Why not? The weights don't care how old you are, they just wait to be picked up." 6 months later, she sent me a video of her doing perfect push-ups. She was stronger than most people half her age, not because of her body, but because of her mind. Stories like that are why I believe so deeply in discipline. Not as a punishment, not as a military routine, but as a path to freedom. Because the truth is, identity is not something you're born with and stuck with forever. It's something you build. One choice, one habit, one day at a time. You are not your job title. You are not your past mistakes. You are not your age. You are what you decide to become, today. And that decision, it takes courage. It takes courage to say, "I don't want to live on autopilot anymore." It takes courage to step into a gym full of younger people and say, "I belong here too." It takes courage to admit that maybe your life hasn't turned out how you hoped, but you still have time to shape it into something meaningful. Discipline is the tool that makes that courage real. You don't need to become a bodybuilder. You don't need to run for governor. But you do need to believe that change is possible. That growth doesn't stop at 40, 50, or even 80. I've seen lives change completely, not with big dramatic moments, but with small daily commitments. That's how you reinvent yourself. Not by tearing everything down, but by building something new, layer by layer. You want to know the real secret? Reinvention isn't about becoming someone else. It's about finally becoming yourself. And it's never too late to do that. So whether you're 35 or 75, I want you to remember this. You are not done. There is still a stronger, wiser, more powerful version of you waiting to be uncovered. Discipline is the chisel. Your life is the sculpture. And you are the artist. Now, let me take you to the final chapter of this journey, where everything comes together, and where the real transformation begins. So if you're sitting there wondering whether it's too late, it's not. That's the message I want to leave you with, not just as some motivational line, but as something I've lived. I've stood at the starting line with nothing but a dream. I've stumbled through failures. I've reinvented myself after public setbacks. I've watched others, decades older than I was when I started, transform their lives completely. And in every one of those stories, including my own, There was no magic formula. No perfect timing. No guaranteed plan. There was only one thing. A decision. That's how discipline works. It doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, young or old, strong or fragile. It just asks, will you make the choice today? You see, when I was that young kid in Austria lifting weights in the cold, I didn't know how far I'd go. I didn't know I'd become Mr. Olympia, a movie star, a governor. All I knew was that if I could get just a little better each day, stronger, sharper, more focused, then eventually I'd get somewhere meaningful. And I did. One rep at a time. One audition at a time. One decision at a time. That's how you do it too. Not all at once. Not overnight. Just one choice at a time. The choice to take that walk. The choice to say no to what's easy and yes to what's right. The choice to forgive yourself and begin again. The choice to try, even when you're scared or tired or think it's too late. Because the truth is, you are not too old, too broken, or too far gone. You are exactly where you need to be to start something new. You don't need to become me. You don't need to chase someone else's version of success. You just need to build a life you're proud of. And that life, it starts now. I said it before and I'll say it again, there is no plan B. Not when it comes to your own fulfillment. Not when it comes to living with purpose. So choose to begin. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. And when it gets hard, because it will, remember this. You're stronger than you think. You've already survived your hardest days. And the discipline that built my life is already inside you. Now go. Not for the applause. Not for perfection. Go for the person you know you're capable of becoming. One choice at a time. I'll be right there with you. Let's begin. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What did this story mean to you? Have you ever gone through a moment in your life when everything seemed to fall apart, and you had to rebuild, step by step? Share your experience in the comments. Your story matters. More than you know. And I read every one of them. You are stronger than you think, and I truly believe in your ability to start again, no matter your age, your past, or your current situation. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you won't miss the next powerful story we share. Wishing you a strong, meaningful day. And if you've made it all the way to the end, type this phrase in the comments so I know you're part of the committed few. One choice at a time.